How's it going, everybody, and thank you so much for tuning into this video. We're continuing with the dually because this thing needs to get done and sold. So as you can see behind me, we have a full set of brand new tires for the dually that need to go on. But before they go on, this thing has a womped front end. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Passenger side lower ball joint. Fix the tie rod ends real quick. That shouldn't be moving that much. Check that idler arm real quick. A lot of play there. And I know for a fact that the driver's side is just as bad, if not worse. How do I know it's worse? Well, a little while back, the pitman arm nut on the bottom of the steering gearbox decided it wanted to come off, and I heard that because it started clunking every time I made a turn. Crawled up underneath there, found the nut to be missing and the threads on the bottom of the steering gearbox to be completely stripped out. I did find another nut and it's holding it, kinda. But nevertheless, we have a couple boxes of brand new parts, so let's open them up. All right, we got the first box here. Let's see what's in it. New upper and lower ball joints. All four of them, with new grease fittings, so that's a plus. In here we have a brand new idler arm, new pitman arm. Oh, there's the pitman arm, that's the idler arm. This is the idler arm bracket, which you guys could see all of that play coming from. New tie rod ends, new center links, and a new gearbox, or a steering gearbox nut and washer. Next box, inside it we have a brand new, or reman, power steering gearbox. So this will take out any of the wobbliness, and it also has brand new threads that are protected by a zip tie and a piece of cloth. So nevertheless, we're gonna give her a shot. Last but not least, we have a brand new steering stem. So I'm going to explain why we're doing all of this work. Number one, because the front end is womped out, but this thing especially, we'll get into that here when we start discussing and removing it. First item on the agenda, after you get your wheel and tire off, you're going to get all your car keys out for your nuts and stuff, but we're going to start getting the tire rod off and the tire rod nut. Outer tie rod, you're just gonna take a hammer, smack right here, it'll pop off. There we go. Also, you're gonna want to get your sway bar and link out of here. That way, it just makes it easier to remove the CV shaft. So, all right, after you get the outside one off, you can grab your tie rod and fork. Jam it in there. Pop it right out. Once we get to this point, we're going to pop our CV shaft out. There's a nut inside here for the outside of that shaft. You're going to take these 15mm bolts out. Swing this down out of the way of the diff real quick. There we go. Slide it back and down and out of the way. Now that you have a lot more room for things to move in here, what we're going to do is we're going to disconnect our ABS wire so we don't end up pulling that out of place. Alright, it's going to be a little hard to see, but now we're going to take the upper and lower nuts, the ball joints loose, and I want everybody to keep in mind, I'm not doing this the most conventional way. I'm only going to remove what I absolutely have to in order to get the ball joints replaced. which is typically the way I go about things. No use removing things if you don't have to, kind of deal. But this is just what works for me. Gonna remove this one upper ball joint bolt. That way I can make the hose go as far as it needs to. So now what I've got here is I've got the top ball joint nut completely off. I got the bottom ball joint nut down here just threaded on by a couple threads. That way when I smack this loose and the knuckle is going to fall down, it will stop here. But then I have this jack here supporting the hub itself so it doesn't fall and rip this hose. So I'm gonna smack those loose. There it goes. There's the upper ball joint. Take that, shove it up out of the way. Alright. Sometimes these ball joints just want to be a little pain in the butt. So what you can do is, with these stamped lower control arms, the ball joints are bolted in, and you can just take the ball joint out with the hub and flip it upside down and smack that ball joint out. Much easier than you can just keep whacking the knuckle. So fortunately I have to do that to this side. The other side there, I already get the ball joints in, and I didn't have to do that, but such is life. Now with that, you can just slide that bottom ball joint out like so, and then you can give it a couple good wraps with a hammer. Surely that ball joint will come out. There we go. That ball joint was still pretty good, but we're replacing all of them because this one is bad. So top ball joint is super easy so long as it hasn't been replaced. So long as it has been replaced before. Usually, if they haven't been replaced, they rivet it in, and you'll have to cut the rivets and push the ball joint off. I know I've replaced these ball joints before, so it's just a 13mm bolt. Alright, now that we've got the ball joints up out of where they don't need to be anymore, I'm just going to show you guys this because I'm going to be doing this. It's going to be a little hard to see, but I got to get the pitman arm off, which is right there, that's hooked to the steering gearbox, off of the center link, as well as the idler arm and the idler arm bracket removed from the frame. Looking at the front of the truck, this is the steering gearbox. It's held on by 3 bolts on the other side, and over here is the idler arm bracket, as well as the idler arm that is held on by 3 bolts on this side of the frame. So again, this is going to be a little difficult to shoot and stuff, but I'm going to at least get that center link detached from the pitman arm and the idler arm. So I don't know if you can see my hands, but you need a 22mm socket, and after you get the cotta pins off, you can go ahead and remove the nuts that bolt the pitman arm and idler arm to the steering center link. Might need an extension. Idler arm all the way over here. Nut comes off pretty easy. Now you're going to take your ball joint fork and cram it right in between that center link and the pitman arm. And there's that. And this one's a little more tricky to hit because the hub's right in the way. So, pardon me. Just like that. Both of them are disconnected. That center link will still be held up by the steering stabilizer, but other than that, the idler arm is ready to come out. We still got to disconnect some things on the steering gearbox to pull that off. But all right, to access the bolt holes for the idler arm, there you have 1, 2, and 3. There'll be nuts on the back sides of those bolts. You can either take the bolts out. It's easiest just to leave them in if at all possible, and you don't have to take the inner fender out. You can just bend this little tab back, and then when you're done, push it back down. Your idler arm sits right here on these 3 bolts. You can get at the top 2 bolts from the back side, like way over here. This one's fairly easy to get at. Like I said, you can just leave these bolts in here, because if you drop them down, then you get a fish through here, this frame with a magnet, and get the bolts out. A lot of time wasted there. Don't need to do that if you don't have to, so you can just try to leave those bolts there, and then your idler arm and bracket come out no problem. I'd say no problem, but it is a pretty tedious task. Nobody really likes doing this. Independent front suspension, I mean, this is a pretty regular job to the ball joints and the pitman arm, stuff like that. It's not a very robust system, but we love our trucks and want to keep them going, so this is what's necessary. Now moving on to the steering gearbox. You have roughly the same 3 bolts. You got 1, 2, and 3. Again, you can just bend the inner fender up to access that 3rd bolt, and that's really easy. There's no nuts on the back of that. So right here you can see that it's just threads. It threads into the steering gearbox. Now that the pitman arm is disconnected from the tie rod center link there, the only thing left to disconnect from the steering gearbox are the power steering hoses and the steering stem, which would have been a lot easier to do before I jacked the truck up on jack stands. But your steering lines are right there on top of the power steering gearbox, and again, it's going to be a little difficult for me to record. But then you have 1 bolt on the steering stem down here, and then you slide the steering stem up. Now we are going to be replacing that with a new one, so we're also going to disconnect it up there at that bolt, and I'll show you why we're replacing the steering stem as well. And that being said, it's a little tight in there. It's going to be very hard to record anything, so I'm just going to fast forward until I get to the point where it's taking the steering gearbox out of the truck. Helping me? Yeah. Steering gearbox is out. I'm going to compare it to the brand new one. The ball joints, pitman arm, idler arm bracket, all that fun stuff. Alright y'all, now that we got everything off, this is the reason why I'm replacing this steering stem. And it is very common on these 90s Chevrolets that the little rubber in here gets oil soaked, and you have a significant amount of movement. Now it may not look like a significant amount, but just that little bit will translate into a couple inches of steering wheel free play. So very common that this happens. It's a wear item. It'll go out over time, and I don't know if this has ever been replaced, so we've got a new one. This will go back in right where the old one used to be. I'm gonna have to take that bolt out because this is a pinch bolt. 1 bolt down here that holds it onto the steering gearbox, and there's 1 bolt up here that holds it onto the actual steering wheel. So let's go ahead and get this installed. Got your steering shaft way down here. This will slide up inside of there. There it goes. Then you have 1 bolt with a little keeper. There. No more. really loose steering. Before we go ahead and bolt this steering gearbox in place, we're gonna put the pitman arm on. And this pitman arm nut bolts to 175 foot-pounds. Gotta get it started just a little bit. Take a socket so you don't mar up the threads. There. Now the nut will go on. All torqued. Doing it by yourself can be a little cumbersome, but very doable. If you don't believe in yourself enough, well, get a buddy. But have a little faith. I'll hold it in place with one hand. You're gonna get that one bolt started. And that's all there is to it. Then you put the other two bolts in. And one right here that's gonna go up the top. Voila. Rear bolt. And you can take and tighten them bolts up. That power steering box ain't going nowhere. Now this is going to be even more difficult to see, but you have this one bolt here for the end of the steering shaft. That steering shaft needs to slide down onto the top input shaft of the power steering gearbox, so it's going to be difficult to see, and you guys probably can't see it at all. Alright y'all, now that the power steering stem, or steering stem rather, is bolted up to the power steering gearbox, I gotta hook these lines up and then put the pitman arm on, or sorry, the idler arm and idler arm bracket. So I'm gonna do that real quick because it's just tight in there. All brand new, looking nice under here. We got that brand new steering shaft in there. I know you guys can't really see right there. Yep, brand new steering shaft. Sorry to the next owner of this, I had to cut that plastic boot off. That thing, I hate that little bastard. You just can't fiddle faddle your fat fingers in there. So yeah, that thing had to go. But I know this isn't much of a tutorial on how to do this, but at least it might show somebody that, hey, somebody put some time and money into this truck before they went ahead and sold it. So the next owner, if it is a fellow subscriber, I'm taking care of it. Let's get on to the ball joints, because that needs to be next. So lower ball joint going on first, because we need to use the lower ball joint as a stay. Go ahead and wind these down. There we go. Top ball joint, really simple. And you're just gonna use bolts. Make sure you look up the torque spec so you actually torque everything down. Guys, there's plenty of forums out there. Just Google like ball joint nut torque. Friggin', it's not that difficult. So now that we have the ball joints on, last thing to do is get the inner and outer tie rod ends on and put the CV axle back in place. Now that we have everything together on both sides, I got the steering wheel locked, and usually what I do after replacing a front end, of course this isn't going to be perfect at all, but I'm going to make it so that I can at least get to the alignment shop without it eating the brand new tires too bad. So typically what I do is I lock the steering wheel in the position that it needs to be, with the pitman, or yes, the steering gearbox where it needs to be if it was to be driving down the road straight. And then what I do is I just eyeball it with a tape measure, and I get the front wheels as close to going straight as possible. Now that will all be taken care of once the truck goes to the alignment shop and they will align everything, but I just want to make it so I can get there without it chewing the tires all to hell or pulling me in the ditch. I usually just eyeball it up, or I'll grab a tape measure and go from the front of each brake rotor across and the back of the caliper at the same height, and that will usually get me close enough. Now I do have new sway bar end links, but I believe I am done with this for the day, and let's just take a gander at it. New upper ball joint, tie rods, new lower ball joint, new power steering gearbox, new pitman arm, grease fittings on everything, new idler arm and bracket. Same deal over here, new ball joints, top and bottom. And we got new tie rods, inner and outer. The clamps is right there. Got new shocks on it from last video. Shot of that new steering stem all the way down to the gearbox. And with that, y'all, we are one step closer to being done with this thing so that the next owner can start enjoying it. But I've got other things to do today, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna call the video end here, and we'll catch you guys in the next one.